All right. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. I hope we're well. Welcome to the first recording for a new philosopher to the VCE uh, reading list, Thomas Nagel, um, with the very strangely named reading, What It Is Like to Be, or What Is It Like, rather, to Be a Bat. Um, Showing this reading to some of my colleagues who don't really sort of get the whole what philosophy is about. Um, the name is certainly making them believe all of the worst assumptions that people have about philosophy. But that's all right. It's actually a really good reading. I've certainly enjoyed going through it. I hope you do too. It's nice to have a dualist perspective from someone who hasn't been dead for like 1,000 years. Um, Nagel's even still alive and kicking. Um, so yeah, it's nice to have a fresher perspective at least. What we're going to see in this is a bit different from the other readings in this section of the study design, because Nagel's not necessarily going to be offering an argument. I think that you could make the suggestion that he's presenting a dualist perspective, um, but even then, he never comes out and outright says that dualism is the correct answer in the way that, for example, Descartes does. Um, Nagel Nagel's text is really more about refocusing the mind-body problem on what the actual problem is from his perspective, which is consciousness. Okay, um, so yeah, try and keep that in mind when we're reading it. He's not really offering a solution, but he's trying to get people to focus in on what the actual problem is because Nagel believes, or believed at the time, and arguably it's still true now, that particularly materialists are no longer dealing with the actual problem within the mind body debate. They're simply ignoring the real problem, which is consciousness. Okay, so we're going to see him introduce this concept in this first part of the reading. And he'll go into much more detail about that later on. And we'll get the bat analogy. Is it analogy? More like sort of explanation for his position in the second recording. But yeah, let's start off with the first recording. So it'll start off by or the first part of the reading rather. It'll start off by Nagel talking about the mind-body problem, what he sees as the core part of the problem, which, as I've already said, is consciousness, your experience of your consciousness at least. He'll have a bit of a swipe at a few of the materialists, including one of the other materialists that we study, which is Smart, by questioning the appropriateness of Smart's lightning is the same as electrical discharge analogy. And so um, this is interesting when you're studying contemporaries like Nagel and Smart were. The fact that we get actually direct interaction between them is always sort of really interesting to be able to think about. Okay, it should help with formulating your responses to questions as well. Well, without any further ado, let's begin. So, right from the start of the reading, what is it like to be a bat? Um, Consciousness is what makes the mind-body problem really intractable. Perhaps that is why current discussions of the problem give it little attention or get it obviously wrong. So throwing jabs straight out of the corner, Nagel. Perhaps that's why the current discussions of the problem give it little attention or get it obviously wrong. He's talking about the materialist explanations there. They're either not paying attention to consciousness or they're just flat out misinterpreting it. The recent wave of reductionist euphoria has produced several analyses of mental phenomena and mental concepts designed to explain the possibility of some variety of materialism, psychophysical identification, or reduction. So reductionism is like a principle that's not bad in itself. Reductionism in things like mathematics and science have been very useful. It's sort of leaning towards the idea that we should always be trying to find the simplest answer. So, theory that more elegantly, more simply explains a concept is a better one, because it reduces the variables that are involved. We have less like if this, if this, if this, if this, then this. If we can just get it down to like if this and this, then this. Um, and so reductionism itself isn't a problem. What Nagel's going to talk about with it and where it does go wrong from his perspective is when we reduce something that can't really be reduced. And we do that by actually just ignoring elements of the problem, or pretending that they don't exist, or denying their existence when they actually do. This is bad reductionism, according to Nagel. Okay. But the problems dealt with are those common to this type of reduction and other types. And what makes the mind-body problem unique? And unlike the water is to H2O problem, or the Turing machine is to the IBM machine problem, or the lightning to electrical discharge problem, that's the SMART reference, or the gene to DNA problem, or the oak tree to hydrocarbon problem is ignored. So Nagel is sort of rattling off a whole series of different examples that have been used by different materialist writers there. Now, it's not particularly important that you understand each of these. Needless to say, they're taking something that was thought to be more complex or more mysterious and identifying them as a relatively straightforward principle. So this is reductionism, and this is when reductionism works well. Okay, yes, lightning is electrical discharge. That's not what Nagel's questioning here. What he's saying is that all of these materialist philosophers who are using these types of analogies are failing to understand the crucial difference that there is when we add consciousness to our mental experience, our mental phenomena. Okay, and this is what makes it wrong from Nagel's point of view to say that mental phenomena is the same as brain processes. Okay. Every reductionist has his favorite analogy from modern science. It is most unlikely that any of these unrelated examples of successful reduction will shed light on the relation of mind to brain, but philosophers share the general human weakness uh, for explanations of what is incomprehensible in terms suited for what is familiar and well understood, though entirely different. So Nagel's sort of accusing all of us really of a type of cognitive bias. We all desperately want to understand our world and, most importantly, ourselves. We want to understand how we exist. And so we take something that can't be explained and we explain it in a way that makes it easy for us to understand, all the while not really explaining anything at all because you can't explain it that way. So this is what he's talking about here. This has led to the acceptance of implausible accounts of the mental, largely because they would permit familiar kinds of reduction. So again, this accusation that the accounts we get of mental phenomena from materialists are implausible. So they don't actually fit with our experience. I shall try to explain why the usual examples do not help to understand the relation between mind and body, why indeed we have at present no conception of what an explanation of the physical nature of a mental phenomenon would be. Without consciousness, the mind-body problem would be much less interesting. With consciousness, it seems hopeless. That's an important little turn there, okay? Because what Nagel's saying is, if you remove consciousness, there's really no argument here. Yes, we're purely physical beings. That's it. But you add consciousness, this is such a crucial ingredient to the discussion that we go from the answer being slap in the face obvious to the answer being almost even theoretically unattainable. Okay, that's how important consciousness is. That's how crucial a question consciousness is from Nagel's perspective. It is the actual mind-body problem from his perspective. The most important and characteristic feature of conscious mental phenomena is very poorly understood. Most reductionist theories do not even try to explain it, and careful examination will show that no currently available concept of reduction is applicable to it. Perhaps a new theoretical form can be devised for the purpose, but such a solution, if it exists, lies in the distant intellectual future. Now, Nagel here is basically telling us what he thinks would be necessary for. Sorry, no, that's fine. Um, what he thinks would be necessary um, for materialism to actually be able to incorporate consciousness into its theory and instead of just ignoring consciousness. Now, this, he says, lies in the distant intellectual future, to use his words. And we'll see him expand on this idea as the reading continues. And what he's basically going to end up saying is that our understanding of our universe, scientific understanding of the world around us, would have to go through such a monumental change that it it would be a complete revolution of scientific understanding. Okay, um, that's how far away science is from explaining um, consciousness. Now, this is not Nagel is not saying that this is impossible. Could it happen? Yes, it could. We may end up with a materialist account of consciousness. But we're not there yet. Nagel is very clearly saying that none of the current materialists have achieved it, and he's most definitely saying that they're not even close to it because they're not actually dealing with consciousness. They're solving the consciousness problem by sweeping it under the rug and ignoring it. Okay, that's not solving the problem. Okay, so yeah, we will get more of an explanation on that as the reading continues. Um, Next, Nagel's going to start talking about why he thinks. So, what is it about consciousness that is so important to this debate? Okay, so let's continue. Conscious experience is a widespread phenomenon. So, Nagel's saying that it extends well beyond just your existence or even just human existence. It occurs at many levels of animal life, though we cannot be sure of its presence in the simpler organisms, and it is very difficult to say in general what provides evidence of it. Some extremists have been prepared to deny it even of mammals other than man. So just to pause here, Nagel is asserting that consciousness must exist in other animals. He is quite generous with consciousness, and he himself applies it to most animal life apart from the most basic. So by that, I'm assuming that he means things like, jellyfish that don't even have a central nervous system or anything like that. But I don't know, maybe not. Most certainly, he's applying it to other higher order animals and at least all of the mammal species group. And so he's saying, look, there are some people that claim that consciousness is uniquely human. Now, can we prove that animals have consciousness? No, we can't. And this is actually part of why it's such an interesting part of the mind-body problem. But if you're going to use that as an example for why, oh, we can't ever know what it is to be a bat because there is no internal experience of being a bat, we'll just be very careful there because you can't know that anyone else has consciousness either. And unless you're going to go down the line of solipsism, where you are the shiny little light that the entire universe revolves around, you're the only one with consciousness, and everything else in existence is essentially an empty shell, um, presumably put there to create this world for you, you egomaniac, then just be careful with saying that animals can't possibly have consciousness simply because they're not human. You don't know that other humans can have consciousness, but you assume that they do. You treat them like they do. Well, animals give us many of the same signs that we demand from humans to consider them conscious. Um, no doubt it occurs in countless forms totally unimaginable to us on other planets, in other solar systems throughout the universe. So Nagel's saying there's likely conscious life in other parts of the universe as well. We are not alone. At least that's what Nagel thinks. But no matter how the form may vary, the fact that an organism has conscious experience at all means basically that there is something it is like to be that organism. Okay, this is an important introduction to kind of a core part of Nagel's idea. In class, I've talked about it being the what it is likeness. Okay, this is crucial for understanding consciousness because it's what consciousness actually is. Your conscious experience of yourself is what it is like to be you. Okay, and only you know what it is like to be you. No one else can know. And even if you tried to explain it to them, they still wouldn't actually know what it is like to be you. Okay. This what it is likeness is really important because this is what Nagel is suggesting the materialists are ignoring. For to link this to broader concepts, this is really qualia, the sensation of your experience, the internal movie or song that's playing in your head, that experience of yourself, your conscious self, the qualia of life. That's really what Nagel's talking about here. There may be further implications about the form of the experience. There may even, though I doubt it, be implications about the behavior of the organism. But fundamentally, an organism has conscious mental states if and only if there is something that it is like to be that organism, something it is like for the organism. So really, this is sort of an idea of sentience. Okay, there is a experiential thing that draws all of the other experiences together into one knitted together whole to give you an experience of your world. Okay. Really, what Nagel's talking about is your unique perspective on the world. That is, that's given to you by your consciousness, and no one else can adopt your perspective. They can try, and walk a mile in your shoes, as the saying goes, but this is not the same as it is to actually walk a mile in your shoes, you doing it. Okay. We may call this the subjective character of experience. So this Nagel's introducing the idea of subjective versus objective. This is going to become very important in his philosophy as we read on. Okay, so this subjective character, this is consciousness. It is not captured by any of the familiar, recently devised reductive analyses of the mental, for all of them are logically compatible with its absence. So what Nagel's saying here is I can take any of the currently available materialist theories and remove the existence of consciousness, and that theory still works in exactly the same way. Now, it shouldn't. Consciousness is important. In fact, Nagel says it's the most important part of the mind-body debate. So the removal of consciousness should be a big problem for a theory. The reason that we can remove consciousness from materialist theories is because they didn't deal with it to begin with. They never even engaged with consciousness. And this is why we can so easily remove it from materialist theories, because they never even put it in. It is not analyzable in terms of any explanatory system of functional states or intentional states, since these could be ascribed to robots or automata that behaved like people, though they experienced nothing. Perhaps there could not actually be such robots. Perhaps anything complex enough to behave like a person would have experiences. But that, if true, is a fact which cannot be discovered merely by analyzing the concept of experience. So here, Nagel's doing exactly what we're expected to do in the study design, which is sort of applying a modern debate. And he's saying, well, if we think of the idea of artificially intelligent robots, then either this is impossible because we can't create subjective point of view, or it is possible and a robot then has a subjective point of view. In other words, a robot would have consciousness. Okay, surely it's one or the other. Either it will be impossible for us to develop real artificial intelligence in terms of an intelligence capability equal to or greater than a human. Or it will be possible, but this means that a robot has consciousness, is self-aware, has an internal experience of the world. Um, it is not analyzable in terms of the causal role of experiences in relation to typical human behaviors uh, for similar reasons. I do not deny that conscious mental states um, and events cause behavior, nor that they may be given functional characterization. Now, important there, I do not deny that conscious mental states and events cause behavior, nor that they may be given functional characterizations. So we can talk about consciousness as a driver of physical behavior. There's nothing wrong with this. I deny only that this kind of thing exhausts their analysis. Any reductionist program has to be based on an analysis of what is to be reduced. If the analysis leaves something out, the problem will be falsely posed. Uh, it is useless to base the defense of materialism on any analysis of mental phenomena that fails to deal explicitly with their subjective character. So again, this idea of subjectiveness. Any materialist explanation that only deals with objective answers and doesn't actually interact with the subjective nature of our consciousness is not answering the question. They are not solving the mind-body problem. They're actually ignoring it. For there is no reason to suppose that a reduction, which seems plausible when no attempt is made to account for consciousness, can be extended to include consciousness. Without some idea, therefore, of what the subjective character of experience is, we cannot know what is required of a physicalist theory. So this is why earlier Nagel said that the materialists are so far away from being able to actually answer the mind-body problem once and for all. Even if they do explain consciousness, at the moment we don't even have the simplest concept. Um, like we have zero idea of how you could explain consciousness in physicalist terms. Like it's not even on the radar. Um, there isn't even like some crackpot with a tinfoil hat spouting out theories. Okay, it's just not part of the conversation. And so this is why the physicalists are so far away from being able to explain consciousness in a purely physical sense. While an account of the physical basis of mind must explain many things, this appears to be the most difficult. It is impossible to exclude the phenomenological features of experience from a reduction in the same way that one excludes the phenomenal features of an ordinary substance from a physical or chemical reduction of it, namely by explaining them as effects on the minds of human observers. If so here, like Nagel's going to use this sort of phenomenological, like the mental phenomenon. What he's talking about is that like activity, that the experience of consciousness is what he's talking about here. Um, so yeah, hopefully that's clear. If physicalism is to be defended, the phenomenological features must themselves be given a physical account. Now that's important. If physicalism is to be defended, the phenomenological features, in other words, the actual like substance of our consciousness, the quality of it, the experience of it, must themselves be given a physical account. So it is not enough to say that my brain is firing, therefore I am thinking, because that is ignoring what it is like for me to think. Okay, what sort of physical explanation do you have for that? Well, none currently. But when we examine their subjective character, it seems that such a result is impossible. The reason is that every subjective phenomenon is essentially connected with a single point of view, and it seems inevitable that an objective physical theory will abandon that point of view. So really, the problem, Nagel says, is we've got people in the materialist camp who are trying to explain consciousness as if one explanation of what consciousness is like could apply to absolutely everyone or everything that has consciousness. We can't even do that from one person to the next. My consciousness is not like yours. I can only assume. I can never actually know what your consciousness is, so there's no way for me to prove it one way or the other. And yet the materialists are talking about consciousness as if it's this really obvious universal thing. Well, that's not what it is, though. That's not how we experience it. And this is sort of what's frustrating Nagel. Uh, if you want to try and explain consciousness in this universal, objective way, then the only way you can do that is by ignoring the subjective differences that we have when we experience each of our individual consciousnesses. And in that way, you're actually ignoring what consciousness is anyway. Consciousness is necessarily subjective. And so the attempts by the materialists to explain it in an objective way are futile, at least in the current state that materialism exists. Okay, so there's recording one. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Some interesting ideas from Nagel there. Like and subscribe. I hope you all have a great day. Thanks for tuning into The Handy Philosopher. I don't know why I've fallen into this pattern of speaking, but I'm going to stop now because it's bedtime. Have a great day.